The unlikely sniper Elena Martinez stood quietly at the edge of the military training ground, watching as another soldier missed his target completely. The rifle cracked through the morning air, and the bullet sailed harmlessly into the dirt embankment behind the practice range. Captain Davidson shook his head in frustration and called for the next volunteer. "Thompson, you're up," the captain barked, his voice carrying the weight of weeks of failed attempts. Elena had been observing this scene for 3 days straight. She worked as a translator for the military base, helping coordinate between the American forces and local Allied units. Her job kept her near the command center, but during her breaks, she found herself drawn to the sniper training range. Something about the precision required fascinated her, though she had never held a rifle in her life. The current training exercise had become legendary on the base for all the wrong reasons. Command had set up a challenging course with 100 targets positioned at various distances and angles. Some targets were as close as 200 yards, others stretched out to nearly 1,000 yards. The targets varied in size, from large practice dummies to small metal discs that glinted in the sunlight. Wind conditions changed throughout the day, and the lighting shifted as clouds moved across the sky. The goal was simple in concept, but devastating in execution. Hit all 100 targets in a single run without missing. No breaks, no second chances, no do-overs. Miss one target, and the entire run was considered a failure. The exercise was designed to test not just accuracy, but mental fortitude, consistency under pressure, and the ability to adapt quickly to changing conditions. So far, 17 different snipers had attempted the challenge. These were not beginners or weekend warriors. Every single one of them was a trained marksman with years of experience. Some had served in multiple combat zones. Others had won shooting competitions at national levels. Several held records for long-distance shots in actual combat situations. Yet none of them had come close to completing the course successfully. The best performance so far belonged to Sergeant Mills, a veteran sniper who had successfully hit 87 targets before missing his 88th shot. The target had been a small metal disc positioned at 700 yards, with a crosswind that had picked up just as he squeezed the trigger. His miss had been by mere inches, but in this exercise, close was not good enough. Most of the other attempts had ended much earlier. The pressure seemed to build with each successful shot, and the knowledge that a single mistake would end everything created a mental burden that even experienced soldiers struggled to carry. Some snipers started strong but fell apart around the 40th or 50th target. Others began making mistakes early, perhaps rushing their shots in an attempt to get through the mental pressure quickly. Elena watched as Thompson lined up for his first shot. He was known as one of the steadiest hands on the base, with a reputation for staying calm under pressure. His breathing was controlled, his stance was textbook perfect, and he had spent the previous evening studying weather conditions and wind patterns. The first shot rang out. Hit. A cheer went up from the small crowd of soldiers who had gathered to watch. Thompson allowed himself a small smile and moved to position 2. Elena found herself holding her breath as she watched. There was something mesmerizing about the process. The careful calculation of distance, wind speed, and target movement. The slow, deliberate breathing. The moment of absolute stillness before the trigger squeeze. Even the sound of the bullet cutting through the air seemed to have its own rhythm. Shot after shot, Thompson continued hitting his marks. 10 targets. 20. 30. The crowd grew larger as word spread that someone was making a serious attempt. By the time Thompson reached his 40th successful shot, nearly 50 people had gathered around the range, including several officers who had come down from the command center. Elena noticed the subtle changes in Thompson's behavior as the pressure mounted. His breathing became slightly more rushed between shots. He took longer to line up each shot, second-guessing himself. His movements, which had been fluid and confident at the beginning, now carried a hint of tension. At target number 53, disaster struck. Thompson's shot went wide, hitting the dirt 6 inches to the left of a medium-sized target positioned at 400 yards. The silence that followed was deafening. Thompson lowered his rifle slowly, his shoulders sagging with disappointment. "Reset the course," Captain Davidson called out. "Who's next?" The crowd began to disperse, soldiers returning to their regular duties with disappointed murmurs. Elena remained where she was, still watching the empty range. She had noticed something during Thompson's run that seemed to escape everyone else's attention. "Excuse me, Captain Davidson," Elena called out as the officer walked past her. Captain Davidson turned, recognizing her as one of the translators. "Yes, what is it?" Elena hesitated for a moment, suddenly, aware of how presumptuous her next words might sound. "I was wondering, may I use your rifle?" The question hung in the air like a physical thing. Captain Davidson stared at her for a long moment, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "The rifle," Elena repeated, her voice steadier than she felt. "May I try the course?" Several nearby soldiers had overheard the conversation and were now turning to look at them. Elena could see the mix of amusement and confusion on their faces. She was a translator, not a soldier. She was 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed barely 120 pounds. Most importantly, she had no military training and no experience with firearms. "Miss Martinez," Captain Davidson said carefully, "this is a military exercise designed for trained snipers. It's not. This isn't something civilians typically." "I understand that," Elena interrupted gently. "But I've been watching for 3 days. I think I might be able to do something that the others haven't tried." Word of the conversation was spreading quickly through the remaining crowd. Elena could hear whispered comments and suppressed laughter. Someone behind her muttered something about crazy civilians who watch too many movies. Captain Davidson looked around at his men, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Miss Martinez, I appreciate your interest, but this is a serious military training exercise. The rifle weighs 12 pounds. The recoil could knock you down. And, more importantly, we have safety protocols." "I'm willing to follow all safety protocols," Elena said. "And I'm willing to sign whatever waivers are necessary. But I'd like to try." The crowd around them had grown again as soldiers sensed drama unfolding. Elena could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on her, measuring her, judging her, waiting to see what would happen next. Sergeant Mills, the sniper who had come closest to completing the course, stepped forward. "Captain, maybe we should let her try? What's the worst that could happen? She misses the first shot, and that's the end of it. Might be good for a laugh." Elena felt a flash of irritation at the condescending tone, but she kept her expression neutral. She had expected this kind of reaction. What she hadn't expected was how much the dismissive attitude would motivate her. Captain Davidson was clearly torn. On one hand, allowing a civilian translator to attempt a military sniper course was highly irregular and probably violated several protocols. On the other hand, the course was just a training exercise, and if proper safety measures were followed, there was no real danger. "What makes you think you can succeed where trained snipers have failed?" he asked finally. Elena had been expecting this question, and she had spent considerable time thinking about her answer. "I've been watching every attempt for 3 days. I've noticed patterns that I don't think the shooters themselves are aware of. Small things in their technique that change as the pressure builds. I think I know why they're failing. Such as, their breathing changes," Elena said. "Not just the breathing pattern they use for shooting, but their overall respiratory rate. As they progress through the course and the pressure increases, their breathing becomes shallower and faster between shots. This affects their oxygen levels and their steadiness." Captain Davidson raised an eyebrow. This was more detailed than he had expected. Elena continued. "Also, they're overthinking the shots as they progress. The first 20 or 30 shots are instinctive, based on training and experience. But as they get deeper into the course, they start second-guessing themselves. They take longer to line up each shot, which gives them more time to doubt and creates more opportunities for small errors to creep in." Several of the soldiers exchanged glances. Her observations were surprisingly astute for someone with no military background. "Furthermore," Elena went on, "they're fighting the pressure instead of using it. Each successful shot increases the stakes for the next one. Instead of treating each shot as an independent event, they're carrying the weight of all the previous shots with them." The crowd had grown quiet, listening to her analysis. Even Sergeant Mills was nodding slightly, recognizing the accuracy of her observations in his own failed attempt. Captain Davidson studied her for a long moment. "You realize that even if I allow this, the chances of you completing the course are essentially zero? The rifle techniques alone take years to master." "I understand that," Elena said. but I'd still like to try. The captain looked around at his men, reading their expressions. Some looked amused, others skeptical, a few appeared genuinely curious to see what would happen. Finally, he made his decision. All right, he said slowly. But we do this properly. Full safety briefing, proper supervision, and you stop the moment I say stop. Understood. Elena nodded, feeling a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness. Understood. Mills, Captain Davidson called. Give her a basic safety briefing, and show her how to hold the rifle. Make sure she understands the fundamentals. For the next hour, Elena received a crash course in rifle handling. Sergeant Mills walked her through the basic components of the weapon, proper stance, breathing techniques, and safety procedures. She proved to be a quick learner, absorbing information rapidly and asking intelligent questions. The rifle felt heavier than she had expected, but not unmanageably so. The scope took some getting used to, and the first few practice shots at a safe target showed that she had a lot to learn about managing recoil and trigger control. But there was something else that both Mills and Captain Davidson noticed during the brief training session. Elena seemed naturally calm under pressure. While most beginners showed visible nervousness when handling a rifle for the first time, she appeared focused and composed. All right, Captain Davidson said finally. The course is reset. All 100 targets are in position. You get one attempt, just like everyone else. Miss any target, and the run is over. Are you ready? Elena looked out at the range, seeing all 100 targets positioned at their various distances and angles. Some were barely visible even through the scope. The wind was picking up slightly, and clouds were beginning to move across the sun, creating shifting light conditions. She took a deep breath and nodded. I'm ready. As she moved to the first shooting position, Elena could feel the weight of expectation from the crowd behind her. Most of them were expecting her to fail quickly and spectacularly. A few seemed genuinely curious to see how she would perform, and a small number appeared to be silently rooting for her, perhaps hoping to see something unexpected happen. Elena settled into position behind the rifle, adjusting her stance according to everything Mills had taught her. She peered through the scope at target number 1, a large practice dummy positioned at 200 yards. This was supposed to be the easiest shot of the course, designed to build confidence before moving on to more challenging targets. She controlled her breathing, just as she had been taught. In through the nose, out through the mouth, settling into the natural respiratory pause where her body was most stable. She lined up the crosshairs, feeling the weight of the rifle against her shoulder. Behind her, the crowd had grown silent. Even the skeptics seemed to understand that this was a moment worth witnessing, regardless of how they expected it to end. Elena squeezed the trigger slowly, steadily, just as Mills had demonstrated. The rifle fired with a sharp crack, and the recoil pushed against her shoulder more firmly than she had anticipated. Through the scope, she saw the target jerk slightly as the bullet found its mark. Hit, called the range officer. A small cheer went up from the crowd, though Elena could hear the surprise in their voices. She had hit the first target, which was more than some people had expected. Elena moved to position 2, where target number 2 waited at 250 yards. As she settled into her stance, she noticed that her hands were steady, her breathing was controlled, and her mind felt surprisingly clear. The second shot rang out. Another hit. By the 5th successful shot, the crowd's attitude began to shift. The laughter and casual comments had faded, replaced by focused attention. By the 10th shot, people were beginning to realize that something unusual might be happening. Elena found herself settling into a rhythm. Observe the target, calculate distance and wind, control breathing, line up the shot, squeeze the trigger. Move to the next position and repeat. Each shot felt like a separate, complete event, unconnected to the shots that came before or after. 20 shots. 30. 40. The crowd grew larger and quieter with each successful hit. Elena was aware of the people watching her, but their presence felt distant and unimportant. Her world had narrowed to the view through the scope, the feeling of the rifle in her hands, and the targets waiting ahead of her. At shot number 50, she paused for a moment to wipe sweat from her forehead. This was further than Thompson had made it. It was further than most of the trained snipers had managed. She could feel the weight of expectation from the crowd, but instead of pressure, it felt like energy she could draw upon. The 50th target was a small metal disc at 600 yards. Elena spent extra time calculating the wind drift and bullet drop. The shot felt perfect from the moment she squeezed the trigger, and the metallic ping of the bullet striking its mark rang clearly across the range. 50 targets down. 50 to go. As she moved toward position 51, Elena noticed that something had changed in the crowd behind her. The casual conversations had stopped completely. She could hear officers speaking in low, urgent tones, and she caught fragments of sentences about notifying command and checking records. Elena lined up her 51st shot, a medium-sized target at 700 yards. This was the same distance that had defeated Sergeant Mills, though the wind conditions were different today. She could feel a slight crosswind from the left, and she adjusted her aim accordingly. The shot rang out, and, for a moment, Elena couldn't see through the scope whether she had hit or missed. Then, the range officer's voice carried across the distance. Hit. Elena closed her eyes for just a moment, feeling a surge of confidence mixed with determination. She was now in uncharted territory, further than any of the previous attempts had managed. Every shot from here on would be setting a new record. But she pushed those thoughts aside. Each shot was just one shot. The only target that mattered was the next one. As she prepared for target number 52, Elena heard Captain Davidson speaking quietly behind her. "Get Colonel Harrison down here," he was saying to someone. "He's going to want to see this." Elena took aim at target 52 and squeezed the trigger. The bullet found its mark, and she moved on to the next position without celebration, without pause, without allowing herself to think about anything except the target ahead of her. Behind her, word was spreading throughout the base that something extraordinary was happening at the sniper range. Officers were making phone calls, soldiers were abandoning their regular duties to watch, and a small crowd was growing into a significant gathering. But Elena was aware of none of this. Her world had narrowed to a single, repeated process: observe, calculate, breathe, aim, shoot. One target at a time, one shot at a time, moving steadily through the course that had defeated every trained sniper who had attempted it. As she lined up shot number 60, Elena felt completely calm, completely focused, and completely committed to seeing how far this remarkable run would take her. The bullet left the rifle with a familiar crack, and target number 60 jerked as the projectile found its mark. 60 down, 40 to go. The afternoon sun continued its arc across the sky, and Elena Martinez, translator turned unlikely sniper, continued her methodical progress through a course that was rapidly becoming the most talked-about event in the base's recent history. #The zone. Elena moved through targets 61 through 70 with mechanical precision. Each shot felt like a natural extension of her breathing, her heartbeat, her entire being focused on the simple act of placing bullets exactly where they needed to go. The rifle had become an extension of herself, and the targets seemed to call out to her through the scope. The crowd behind her had grown to over 200 people. Word had spread throughout the base that something unprecedented was happening at the sniper range. Officers who had never shown interest in marksmanship were standing shoulder to shoulder with veteran snipers, all watching in stunned silence as Elena methodically dismantled a course that had humiliated some of the best shooters on the base. Colonel Harrison arrived at target 73, just in time to see Elena place a perfect shot into a small metal disc at 800 yards. He pulled Captain Davidson aside, speaking in urgent whispers. "How many has she hit?" the colonel asked. 73 consecutive targets, sir. No misses. She's broken every record we have." Colonel Harrison studied Elena through his binoculars. She was moving to position 74 with the same calm determination she had shown from the beginning. Her movements were fluid and confident, showing no signs of fatigue or pressure. "What do we know about her background?" the colonel asked. Elena Martinez, civilian translator. Age 26. Born in Spain, moved to the United States for college. Degree in linguistics from Georgetown University. No military background, no firearms experience that we know of. She's worked on the base for 8 months, primarily translating communications between our forces and Spanish-speaking allied units. The colonel shook his head in disbelief. "And she's never fired a rifle before today?" According to Sergeant Mills, she received about an hour of basic instruction this morning. That's it. Elena lined up her 74th shot, a challenging target positioned at 900 yards with a slight upward angle. The wind had picked up throughout the afternoon, adding complexity to the longer shots. She spent several extra seconds calculating the wind drift, feeling the breeze on her face, and watching the way it moved the grass between her position and the target. The shot rang out, and the distant target jerked as the bullet found its mark. 74, the range officer called out. A murmur of amazement rippled through the crowd. Elena was now in territory that no one on the base had ever reached. Every subsequent shot would be setting a new record, pushing the boundaries of what anyone had thought possible on this course. But Elena seemed unaware of the historic nature of what she was accomplishing. She moved to position 75 with the same steady rhythm she had maintained throughout the afternoon. Her breathing was still controlled, her movements still fluid, her focus still absolute. Target 75 was another small disc, this one at the maximum range of the course, 1,000 yards. At this distance, wind drift became a major factor, and the slightest miscalculation could send the bullet several feet off target. Most of the previous attempts had failed well before reaching this range, and those few snipers who had made it this far had found the 1,000-yard shots to be nearly impossible under the pressure of a perfect run. Elena settled into position behind the rifle, peering through the scope at a target that appeared as little more than a glint of metal in the distance. She could feel the wind, variable and shifting, sometimes gusting from the left, sometimes dropping to almost nothing, occasionally swirling in unpredictable patterns. She waited. This was something that had impressed Sergeant Mills during her brief training session. Most beginners were eager to shoot quickly, but Elena seemed to understand instinctively that patience was often the difference between a hit and a miss. She waited for the wind to settle into a pattern she could read and compensate for. The breeze dropped to a steady flow from the left at what Elena estimated to be about 8 miles per hour. She adjusted her aim to compensate for the wind drift, took a deep breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger during the natural pause in her respiratory cycle. The bullet's flight time to the target was just over a second. Elena kept the rifle steady and watched through the scope as the distant target jerked slightly. Hit! The cheer that went up from the crowd was the loudest yet. Several soldiers actually applauded, something that hadn't happened for any of the previous attempts. Elena allowed herself a small smile as she moved to position 76, but her focus remained unbroken. Behind her, Colonel Harrison was making phone calls. Word of Elena's performance had reached division headquarters, and senior officers were beginning to ask questions. How was a civilian translator outperforming trained military snipers? What were the implications for current training programs? Should the entire sniper curriculum be reviewed in light of what was happening at this base? Elena was unaware of the growing attention from higher levels of command. Her world remained focused on the view through her scope, the feeling of the rifle in her hands, and the targets that awaited her. Targets 76 through 80 fell in quick succession. Elena's rhythm had become almost meditative. She moved from position to position with practiced efficiency, even though she was doing this for the first time. Each shot felt perfect from the moment she squeezed the trigger, and each bullet found its intended target with precision that was beginning to seem almost supernatural. At target 81, Elena encountered her first real challenge of the afternoon. The target was a medium-sized metal plate positioned at 700 yards, but it was partially obscured by a wooden post that created a narrow shooting window. Previous snipers had found this to be one of the most difficult shots on the course, requiring perfect positioning and timing. Elena studied the target through her scope for longer than usual. The shooting angle required her to thread the bullet through a gap that was less than 6 inches wide. A slight error in aim or a small gust of wind at the wrong moment could send the bullet into the wooden post, ending her run just 19 targets short of completion. She adjusted her position slightly, trying to optimize her angle of approach. The wind was relatively calm, but she could see leaves moving in the trees beyond the target, indicating that conditions could change quickly. Elena settled into her shooting stance and controlled her breathing. Through the scope, she could see the narrow gap between the wooden post and the target. She lined up her crosshairs, accounting for distance, wind, and the precise angle needed to clear the obstruction. The shot rang out, and Elena held her breath as she watched through the scope. For a moment, she couldn't tell whether the bullet had found its mark or struck the wooden post. Then, she saw the target plate swing slightly on its mounting. Hit! The crowd erupted in cheers. Even some of the veteran snipers who had initially been skeptical were now openly admiring Elena's performance. The shot through the narrow gap had been a display of precision that would have been impressive for an experienced marksman, let alone someone firing a rifle for the first time. Elena moved to position 82, still maintaining her calm rhythm despite the growing excitement around her. She could hear conversations in the crowd, people discussing what they were witnessing and trying to understand how it was possible. "She's in the zone," she heard one soldier say to another. "I've seen it before with athletes and pilots. Sometimes people find a level of focus that's almost superhuman." Elena lined up her 82nd shot, another long-range target at 900 yards. The afternoon sun was beginning to sink lower in the sky, creating changing light conditions that added another variable to the equation. She compensated for the angle of the light and squeezed the trigger. Target 82 fell. 83, 84, 85. Each successful shot brought Elena closer to a goal that had seemed impossible when the day began. The crowd was now completely silent between shots, holding their collective breath as they watched history being made. At target 86, Elena paused for the first time in nearly an hour. She could feel sweat on her forehead despite the cool afternoon air, and her hands felt slightly cramped from gripping the rifle. She flexed her fingers, rolled her shoulders, and took several deep breaths. This was the moment that had defeated every previous attempt. As the shot count climbed higher, the pressure became almost unbearable. The knowledge that a single mistake would erase hours of perfect shooting created a psychological burden that even experienced snipers found overwhelming. Elena could feel that pressure now for the first time. With 14 targets remaining, she was closer to completing the impossible course than anyone had ever been. The weight of expectation from the crowd, the historic nature of what she was attempting, and the simple mathematics of how close she was to success all combined to create a mental challenge unlike anything she had experienced. She closed her eyes for a moment, blocking out the crowd, the pressure, and the significance of what she was doing. When she opened them, her focus returned to its earlier clarity. Target 86 was just another target. The shot was just another shot. The bullet found its mark, and Elena moved on to position 87. Behind her, Colonel Harrison was fielding phone calls from officers who wanted real-time updates on Elena's progress. Word had reached the Pentagon, and there was talk of sending observers to witness the conclusion of the run. Elena was aware of none of this. Her universe had contracted to its essential elements: rifle, scope, target, trigger. Everything else faded into background noise that couldn't penetrate her concentration. Targets 87, 88, and 89 fell in rapid succession. Elena's confidence was building with each successful shot, but she was careful not to let that confidence become overconfidence. Each target still received her full attention and careful preparation. At position 90, Elena allowed herself to acknowledge for the first time that she might actually complete the course. 10 targets remained, 10 shots between her and an achievement that no trained sniper had managed to accomplish. Target 90 was positioned at 600 yards, a moderate distance by the standards of the course. Elena lined up the shot with the same care she had shown throughout the afternoon, squeezed the trigger, and watched the target jerk as the bullet struck home. 9 targets remaining. The crowd was now completely motionless. Even the officers had stopped their whispered conversations. Everyone seemed to understand that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come, regardless of whether Elena completed the final 9 shots. Target 91 was another 1,000-yard shot, positioned at the maximum range of the course. Elena could feel the wind picking up as the afternoon progressed toward evening. She waited patiently for the conditions to stabilize, then took her shot. The bullet seemed to hang in the air forever before finding its target. 8 remaining. Elena moved to position 92 with the same steady rhythm she had maintained all afternoon. Her breathing was still controlled, her movements still fluid, but she could feel the weight of the moment beginning to press down on her. This was where Sergeant Mills had described feeling the pressure most intensely during his attempt. The final 10 shots carried the psychological burden of everything that had come before. Each successful shot made the remaining targets more important, more pressure-filled, more likely to be the one that ended the run. Elena understood this intellectually, but she found herself able to push those thoughts aside. Each shot was still just one shot. Each target was still just one target. The number of targets remaining was irrelevant if she focused only on the target in front of her. Target 92 fell. Then 93. Then 94. 6 targets remaining. The crowd was so quiet now that Elena could hear individual people breathing behind her. She could feel their attention like a physical weight, but it didn't break her concentration. If anything, their focus seemed to feed her own. Target 95 was positioned at 800 yards with a strong crosswind. Elena spent extra time reading the wind conditions, watching the movement of grass and leaves to gauge the shifting air currents. When she finally took the shot, it felt perfect from the moment the bullet left the rifle. 5 remaining. Elena moved to position 96, aware for the first time that her heart rate had increased slightly. She was so close to completing something that everyone had thought was impossible. 5 perfect shots stood between her and a level of achievement that would redefine what people thought was possible on this course. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate back to its normal rhythm. Target 96 was a medium-sized plate at 700 yards. Elena lined up the shot, squeezed the trigger, and watched the target swing on its mount. For remaining, the silence from the crowd was now absolute. Elena could hear the wind in the trees, the distant sound of vehicles moving around the base, even the flutter of a flag somewhere behind her. But these sounds seemed to come from another world, separate from the focused bubble of concentration that surrounded her. Target 97 was one of the most challenging shots remaining. A small metal disc at 900 yards, positioned to require precise calculation of wind drift and bullet drop. Elena studied the target through her scope, calculating and recalculating her adjustments. When she finally took the shot, she knew it was good before the bullet reached its target. The feeling was unmistakable: perfect sight alignment, perfect trigger squeeze, perfect follow-through. The bullet struck the center of the small disc with a metallic ping that rang clearly across the range. 3 remaining. Elena moved to position 98, feeling a surge of excitement that she had to consciously suppress. This was not the time to let emotions interfere with performance. 3 shots remained, and each one deserved the same careful attention she had given to the previous 97. Target 98 was positioned at 600 yards, a relatively moderate distance, but with a tricky shooting angle that required careful positioning. Elena adjusted her stance, lined up the shot, and squeezed the trigger with the same steady pressure she had used throughout the afternoon. The bullet found its mark. 2 remaining. As Elena moved toward position 99, she could feel the historic weight of the moment. No one had ever reached this point on the course. Every step she took was into uncharted territory. Behind her, she could sense the crowd holding its collective breath, waiting to see if she could maintain her perfect performance for just 2 more shots. Target 99 was another 1,000-yard shot, positioned at the maximum range of the course. The wind had picked up significantly as the afternoon wore on, and Elena could see the grass between her position and the target moving in complex patterns that indicated shifting air currents. She waited, watching the wind patterns and trying to find a moment when the conditions would be stable enough for an accurate shot. This was perhaps the most difficult target remaining, and she knew that patience would be more important than speed. After several minutes of observation, Elena saw her opportunity. The wind settled into a steady pattern from the left, and she quickly adjusted her aim and took the shot. Through the scope, she watched the bullet's trajectory, following its path toward the distant target. At 1,000 yards, the flight time was just over a second, but it felt like an eternity. The target jerked as the bullet struck home. 1 target remaining. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the achievement that was now just 1 shot away. Behind her, the crowd was so quiet that she could hear her own heartbeat. When she opened her eyes, her focus returned with crystal clarity. Target 100 was positioned at 800 yards, a moderate distance, but requiring careful calculation due to the wind conditions and the angle of the late afternoon sun. This was it. 1 shot between Elena and a perfect run that would redefine what people thought was possible. As she moved to the final shooting position, Elena realized that something had changed in her approach to this shot. For the first 99 targets, she had focused only on the immediate task, avoiding thoughts about the broader significance of what she was attempting. But now, with just one shot remaining, she allowed herself to acknowledge what was at stake. This wasn't just about completing a training exercise. This was about proving that expertise could come from unexpected sources, that fresh perspectives could sometimes see solutions that experience had missed, and that determination and focus could overcome any amount of training or background. Elena settled into position behind the rifle for the 100th time that day. Through the scope, she could see target number 100 clearly, a medium-sized metal plate that represented the difference between the impossible and the inevitable. She controlled her breathing, feeling the familiar rhythm that had carried her through 99 successful shots. The wind was steady, the light was good, and her hands were as steady as they had been at the beginning of the day. Elena lined up the crosshairs on target 100, took a deep breath, let half of it out, and settled into the natural pause in her respiratory cycle. The moment felt suspended in time, balanced perfectly between success and failure, between the extraordinary and the impossible. She squeezed the trigger with the same steady pressure she had used 99 times before, and the rifle fired with a familiar crack that echoed across the silent range. #perfect. The bullet flew through the afternoon air with deadly precision, covering the 800 yards to target number 100 in just over a second. Elena kept the rifle steady and watched through the scope as the projectile found its mark, striking the metal plate dead center with a metallic ping that seemed to ring louder than any of the previous 99 hits. For a moment, complete silence held the range. Then, the range officer's voice broke through the stillness with 3 simple words that would echo through military training facilities for years to come. Course complete. Perfect run. The explosion of sound from the crowd was deafening. 200 soldiers, officers, and support personnel erupted in cheers, applause, and shouts of amazement. Elena lowered the rifle slowly, her hands trembling slightly as the magnitude of what she had just accomplished began to sink in. She had hit all 100 targets without a single miss. A civilian translator with no military background and no previous firearms experience had just completed a course that had defeated every trained sniper who had attempted it. Colonel Harrison was the first to reach her, his face showing a mixture of amazement and disbelief. "Miss Martinez," he said, extending his hand. "That was the most extraordinary display of marksmanship I've ever witnessed." Elena shook his hand, still feeling somewhat dazed by what had just happened. The crowd pressed closer, eager to congratulate her and to be part of the historic moment. Sergeant Mills, who had initially doubted her ability to hit even the first target, was now looking at her with something approaching awe. "How did you do it?" Mills asked. "What was different about your approach?" Elena thought for a moment before answering. "I think it was because I didn't know it was supposed to be impossible," she said. "You all had the experience to understand how difficult the course was, which created pressure and expectations. I just focused on hitting one target at a time." Captain Davidson stepped forward, shaking his head in wonder. "In 20 years of military service, I've never seen anything like this. We need to document everything about your technique, your approach, your mental state. This could revolutionize how we train snipers." Word of Elena's achievement spread through the military network with remarkable speed. Within hours, her perfect run was being discussed at the Pentagon, in training facilities around the world, and in military academies where future officers were taught that excellence required years of dedicated practice and experience. The immediate reaction was a mixture of celebration and analysis. How had someone with no background in firearms achieved something that eluded the best-trained marksmen in the military? What did this say about current training methods? Were there lessons that could be applied to other areas of military education? Elena found herself at the center of intense interest from military researchers, training specialists, and marksmanship experts. Everyone wanted to understand her technique, her mindset, and her approach to handling pressure. Dr. Sarah Chun, a sports psychologist who worked with military training programs, arrived at the base 3 days after Elena's record-setting performance. She conducted extensive interviews with Elena, trying to understand the mental processes that had enabled such an extraordinary achievement. What were you thinking about during the final 10 shots? Dr. Chen asked during one of their sessions. The same thing I was thinking about during the first 10 shots, Elena replied. Just the target in front of me. I know everyone expects that the pressure would build as I got closer to the end, but I found that if I focused only on the immediate task, the pressure didn't have anywhere to take hold. Dr. Chen made notes as Elena spoke. Did you visualize success? Did you think about what it would mean to complete the course? Not until the very last shot, Elena said. For 99 targets, I treated each shot as if it were the only shot that mattered. It wasn't until I was lining up target number 100 that I allowed myself to think about what completing the course would mean. The interviews revealed that Elena's approach had been fundamentally different from that of the trained snipers who had attempted the course before her. While experienced marksmen brought years of knowledge about what could go wrong, Elena approached each shot with a beginner's mind, free from preconceptions about difficulty and failure. She experienced what we call beginner's luck, taken to an extreme level, Dr. Chen explained in her preliminary report. But it wasn't really luck. It was the result of approaching a complex task with complete focus and without the psychological baggage that experience can sometimes create. Elena's technique was analyzed frame by frame using video footage from the range. Military marksmanship instructors studied her breathing patterns, her stance, her trigger control, and her target acquisition process. What they found was a textbook demonstration of fundamental shooting principles, executed with a consistency that was remarkable for someone with no previous experience. She did everything right, Sergeant Mills observed after reviewing the footage. But, more importantly, she did everything the same way every time. There was no variation in her technique from shot 1 to shot 100. The military's interest in Elena's achievement went beyond mere curiosity. If her approach could be understood and replicated, it might lead to improvements in training programs that had remained largely unchanged for decades. The possibility that a completely different approach might be more effective than traditional methods had significant implications for military readiness and effectiveness. Elena was offered the opportunity to work with military training specialists to develop new instructional programs. The idea was to capture her approach and find ways to teach it to others. Could the mindset that had enabled her perfect run be transferred to soldiers who were struggling with traditional marksmanship training? I'm honored by the offer, Elena said during a meeting with Colonel Harrison and several training specialists. But I think the most important lesson from what happened isn't about shooting technique. It's about approaching challenges without preconceived notions about what's possible. Over the following weeks, Elena worked with instructors to develop a modified training program that emphasized mental preparation and psychological approach as much as technical skill. The new program included meditation techniques, stress management strategies, and methods for maintaining focus under pressure. The first group of soldiers to go through the modified training program showed remarkable improvement in their marksmanship scores. While none of them came close to Elena's perfect 100-target run, several achieved scores that were significantly higher than what traditional training had produced. The key insight, explained Dr. Chun in her final report, is that expertise can sometimes be a limitation as much as an advantage. Experienced shooters brought expectations and fears that interfered with their performance. Elena's lack of experience was actually an asset because she approached each shot without preconceptions about difficulty or failure. Elena's story became a case study in military training programs around the world. Her achievement was cited in papers on sports psychology, training methodology, and performance under pressure. The phrase beginner's mind became a common term in military training circles, referring to the ability to approach familiar tasks with fresh perspective and freedom from limiting beliefs. But perhaps the most significant impact of Elena's perfect run was on the individuals who witnessed it. For the soldiers who had struggled with the course, her achievement proved that excellence was possible. For the instructors, it demonstrated that there were always new ways to approach old problems. For the military as an institution, it reinforced the importance of remaining open to unexpected sources of insight and innovation. Elena continued working as a translator on the base, but her role gradually expanded to include consultation on training programs and psychological preparation for high-stress situations. She became a regular speaker at military academies and training facilities, sharing her story and the lessons learned from her extraordinary afternoon at the sniper range. The most important thing to understand, Elena would tell audiences of military trainees, is that your limitations are often more mental than physical. I succeeded not because I was naturally gifted at shooting, but because I approached the challenge without believing it was impossible. The 100-target course remained active at the base, and other soldiers continued to attempt it. Elena's perfect run had set a standard that seemed untouchable, but it had also proved that the standard was achievable. Several snipers came close to matching her performance, with the best attempt reaching 96 consecutive hits before missing. 1 year after Elena's record-setting run, the military established the Elena Martinez Award for Excellence in Marksmanship Training. The award recognized not just superior shooting performance, but innovative approaches to training and mental preparation. Elena herself presented the first award to a young soldier who had developed new techniques for helping struggling marksmen overcome performance anxiety. What Elena showed us, Colonel Harrison said during the award ceremony, is that excellence can come from the most unexpected sources. Her achievement reminds us to stay open to new ideas, new approaches, and new ways of thinking about old problems. Elena's story spread beyond military circles, becoming an inspiration for athletes, students, and professionals in various fields. Her approach to handling pressure and maintaining focus under stress was studied by business schools, sports teams, and performance specialists in numerous disciplines. The phrase, "May I use your rifle?" became something of a legend on the base, symbolizing the courage to attempt something that others considered impossible. New soldiers arriving at the base would often ask to hear the story of the translator who had outshot every trained sniper by approaching the challenge with fresh eyes and an uncluttered mind. Elena herself remained remarkably grounded about her achievement. In interviews, she consistently emphasized that her success had been the result of focus and preparation rather than natural talent or luck. She encouraged others to approach their own challenges with similar openness and determination. "The rifle didn't know I was inexperienced," she would often say. "The targets didn't know I was just a translator. The only limitations that mattered were the ones I chose to accept or reject in my own mind." 5 years after her perfect run, Elena was promoted to head of psychological training for the entire military district. Her programs had been so successful that they were being implemented at bases around the world. The simple question she had asked that afternoon, "May I use your rifle?" had led to a revolution in how the military thought about training, expertise, and human potential. The 100-target course still stands at the base today, a testament to Elena's remarkable achievement and a continuing challenge for future marksmen. A plaque near the range commemorates the day when a civilian translator proved that the impossible was merely improbable, and that fresh perspective could sometimes see solutions that experience had missed. Elena's perfect run remains the only 100% completion of the course in its history. But, perhaps more importantly, her story continues to inspire others to question their own limitations and to approach challenges with the kind of open, focused mindset that turned an impossible task into an inevitable success. The range officer's words from that remarkable afternoon, "Course complete, perfect run," are now part of military training lore, representing not just an extraordinary individual achievement, but a powerful reminder that excellence can emerge from the most unexpected places when skill, determination, and an uncluttered mind come together in perfect harmony. Elena Martinez had asked a simple question and received permission to try something that everyone believed was impossible. Her response to that opportunity had redefined what people thought was achievable and had created a legacy that would influence military training for generations to come. In the end, the most remarkable thing about Elena's perfect run was not the technical precision of her shooting, but the mental clarity and focused determination that had made such precision possible. She had proved that expertise was not always about experience, that fresh perspective could sometimes see solutions that training had missed, and that the courage to attempt the impossible was often the first step toward achieving it. The 100 targets had fallen, one by one, to someone who had simply asked for the opportunity to try. And, in doing so, Elena Martinez had shown that sometimes the most profound achievements come not from those who know what's possible, but from those who are willing to discover what might be.